All right, welcome everyone. This is a public meeting of the West Bend School District and School Board Curriculum Committee. It is 4:30 p.m. on May 20th of 2025, and we'll start with introductions. My name is Melanie Ergott. I'm a school board member.
June Kruger, school board member.
Kelly Lang, school board member.
Heather Isaacson, program administrator.
Kelly Downs, curriculum coordinator.
Tina Vanru, district data coordinator.
Erin Faust, program administrator.
Jen Wimmer, superintendent.
All right, we will begin with our first discussion item, which is to appoint a committee chair. Did you want to start with that, Jen?
Well, this is your first meeting after the board reorganization. Now, it doesn't feel like it because I have 3 returning members, so thank you for those pieces. Melanie, you've served as the committee chair, so now's the time if you'd like to continue in that role or if anyone else would like that role. It's really for the group to decide.
I'm happy to continue in this role, but if anybody else is interested,
I am happy to have you continue in that role.
all right, well,
Well, with
I'm
that
happy to
support,
accept that
Melanie.
nomination.
This is more armless. Like, no, I think Melanie needs to do it. Great. So then Melanie would continue as chair.
Sounds good. All right, then we will move on to our next discussion item, which is the 2025-2026 Curriculum Committee meeting calendar.
So same thing with reorganization. This is a time for you to reconsider, do Tuesdays work? Does this time work? The structure of your committee. And then you can see Ashley was nice enough to put together a potential calendar following the days of the week and the time, but that lines up where the board meetings are. So this places your committee meeting in advance of a board meeting. So as you know, things flow out of your committee for board discussion and approval. So that lines it up for you in that manner. So really, anything is open. Does the day of the work still meet for the team? Okay. Does the time of 4:30 still work for the team? Great. And then are there any conflicts with that calendar or anything that the group would like to consider? And certainly, if something happens, comes up, whether or not it's posted or we, reschedule or cancel, that can occur as well. But this is just laying out when those days would be.
I know that the October and the March dates will not work for me,
Okay.
but if we could just push back a week even on those.
Perfect. So you're
be
looking
fine.
at specifically in October, so if we were coming up into September and maybe meeting on the 30th, would that work for people? Potentially, yeah, moving it to September 30th, so that still lines you up in advance of that board meeting. So you're good on that. It's not the same week as a board meeting, so it gives you that, but avoids that conflict. So replacing October 7th with September 30th would be a change. And then Kelly, you were saying the same with March, was it? So March 3rd not working. Now, because February is a short week, is it the day of the week that doesn't work with you, or would you like to have a meeting in the same week as a board meeting?
I'm gone that whole week.
Okay,
So if we could do it one of the weeks around the board meeting would be better for me.
sure. Do people prefer looking at the week of the 23rd is a board meeting? So you have a Monday night board meeting then. Would you prefer meeting that next day on the Tuesday to keep the Tuesday consistent? Would you rather have it the week above that? That puts you at meeting potentially, not back-to-back weeks, so a week space in there.
Should we move the March occurrence to the 17th?
You could also do that, and then we're just cognizant of that shift, so things need to come forward at certain intervals to hit board meetings. We could do that too. That probably might feel a little bit better for your schedules, quite honestly.
I'm fine with any of those options.
I would recommend March 17th then. And then that's something that we just need to manage as deadlines. That keeps your schedules clear. I think the other might be too tight up against the other meeting. It gives us space to do some work. And then how we schedule those things on the agenda for board meetings, we can manage on our end. So then we'd be replacing, it's currently the March 3rd meeting with March 17th. Perfect. We can make those changes, and then we will post those meetings. Thank you for that.
Okay, then we will move on to our next discussion item, which is the course name update for Advanced Algebra to Algebra 2. And that will be presented by Kelly Downs.
So currently, we have a course that is named Advanced Algebra, but the content of it is what state, nationally is recognized as Algebra 2. So we're just basically recommending that we change this naming convention to better reflect what it really is and what is done. And this aligns with our curriculum implementation as well, so.
Yep, that sounds fine to me. Just a name change and nothing major, so. All right. Okay, then we will move to our next item, which is book club review and recommendation process. And this will be presented by Erin Faust.
And Dr. Wimmer's going
Yeah.
to jump in with me as well.
Tag team a little bit of that too. So we wanted to review, we've been a couple of years into the journey around book club reviews, and we got some parent feedback, and we wanted to be really intentional around going out to gather staff feedback, as well as asking all parents and guardians to provide us feedback again. Last year was our first kind of full year with process. We did that at the end of the year, and we came away with some new permission slip things and all of that. Some of the interim feedback that we received talked about kind of being a little bit confused as a parent or someone reading that. When we say NA, not applicable, we're talking about it being matched to a threshold versus kind of public perception that it doesn't exist in there, that it's not applicable. So that might be confusing. So I think those things really warrant attention. So that was kind of what we're recommending as next steps. First, I wanted to ground us. If you look in your documents, you will see a document that kind of shows you your overall process. And we have 3 buckets that we've really talked about our books in and did a lot of, I would say, deeper work in graphic violence and sexual content. And we still have the excessive obscene language kind of hanging out there. Right now, we have no as our threshold for any piece. But recall, we did some deep work with the full board around what does it really mean around graphic violence. And you see around the current, if you click on that document, it gives you that expanded definition. And then it actually has samples of how you would apply that test into decision making. Because recall, anyone can recommend books, and then the board kind of all came together around these definitions, and then this committee executes on those decisions. Now, we have had a couple instances where we went outside this committee because the committee didn't have the authorization and they needed to be reviewed with the full board. We did that with the dystopian novels. We were running into some things that we didn't think were anticipated. And then one piece that we had talked about was really then probably surfacing that conversation with the board again around obscene language and what that means. That is a little bit easier of a bucket because you have the FCC regulations that really kind of talk about and are easily understood. So that might help provide that. So there's kind of that multifaceted piece where we should probably do another round of soliciting feedback from our families and our staff who are using the process. And that we know out of the gate, there's probably, and that's why I linked just the old one of that permission slip, come around, what does that really mean? Or even putting what does the threshold mean right on that piece, that permission slip. And then we also talked about, as we look for a new vendor to overhaul our website, how can we make this work a little bit more forward-facing so that families or even other districts who want to model like what a solid process looks like, that's accessible to them, or maybe kids who are doing homework and need to write about a topic of interest, that it's a little bit more accessible. So those were some of the pieces as we walked through what we thought needed to be updated or revisited. So we just brought it to the committee for any thoughts that you might have as you kind of own execution of this process too. And anything from your perspective, Aaron, around some of those recommendations? Aaron really is a liaison from the department to the teachers, and, you know, those on the front lines as you're reviewing books, you know, those are the ones where you're rubbing up against, well, does this mean this or does this mean that? You know, they're kind of the usage. Aaron, was there anything from your perspective you needed to add?
Ultimately, this is the document that teachers see when they are requesting books. So this would be the process that teachers go through before books make it to the Curriculum and Instruction Department, ultimately to this committee, and then on to the board. So each quarter, there is a timeline that backs this up for completion by the teams to bring new books forward, to make recommendations to maybe rehome a book, or ultimately just say we're going to continue on as is for the upcoming school year.
I just had a question, like regarding when you were talking about the website, you know, perhaps developing that more. I see here, like, for the teachers, it says to, you know, provide specific words or phrases that may be considered. Is that like when the teacher's bringing a book forward, they might say, hey, this might be questionable in here? Is that, like, maybe that's something that we could put on the website?
There's some things that we wouldn't. So we restricted words that we wouldn't use. We didn't want those on permission slips. I still recommend you hold with that, and that I wouldn't make those public facing. But know and understand there may be some questionable language or this, and how to contact us if they want that specific. Because our teachers do vet that. We write the actual passage. We have the exact words, because you need that as you vet it. We need it. The board needs that, but we don't need to necessarily make that public facing.
right.
But how to access it might be a good spot, because then they can really decide as a family.
Right, because sometimes seeing that, you might think like, oh, I don't want my kids to read that. But then
But
when
you don't
like
know.
you've read stuff before, you know, in front of us before, and it's like, oh, that really isn't that that controversial, or, you know.
Yeah, if there was no language, you know, and if it was, like you said, relatively kind of a benign passage, yep, that could be out there, but I just would be cognizant of where I draw that line.
Sure.
No other questions, then we're going to move forward with seeking feedback from all of our staff as well as our families if they've got any updates, because then we can fold that into our recommendation in our future conversation. And then we'll do that. And then I would recommend, I'll work with Chris, if you're okay with it, the whole board should be talking about the language piece at that. And then we can always kind of take it back and kind of make it work or tweak it, test it on their behalf. But I think that's what we'll do. So we'll schedule that. Thank you. Now that you have the process stuck in your mind.
Yeah, we'll move on to the book club recommendations for quarter one.
Yep. So following this same process and being timely and expeditious for next school year, we have asked our teachers to complete their book club reviews for quarter one so that they have all of their data and information ready to go as soon as school begins. So what we have this evening is just the discussion of what the teams have recommended, and it's just a little bit different by grade level. So as you know, fifth grade is shifting to utilizing the CKLA curriculum next year, which is very different than the current process that they've undertaken. So they will not be utilizing book clubs in the format that we've been using for the past few years. Sixth grade does not utilize book club and hasn't for several years in their quarter one as an instructional strategy. So that is status quo, just putting that out there for the team. Seventh grade, which is one of the documents, the only document that's linked on here, is seeking to, as I said earlier, rehome 3 of their books, just to create better alignment to the standards of the books that are going to remain in the unit. So they're not necessarily saying we will never use these books, they're just putting them in a unit where they better align with other standards. So the first book that they're moving is The War That Saved My Life, which is moving to their quarter 3 historical fiction unit. A book called New Kid is moving to quarter 4, narrative nonfiction, and My Family Divided will be available for 8th grade quarter 4 usage. In moving those books, we wanted to be sure that it wasn't going to create any sort of limits on the availability of the books that are remaining. Their list was already very lengthy with these books, So they will still have a solid list of 20 titles, 11 of which are currently designated as NA in all 3 of the categories. So questions on that one before I move to the rest of this? Okay,
Take the next 3 as a batch.
great.
And if you look at grade 8, grade 9, and grade 10, each team is asking to add a new title. Each one of those titles exceeds your authority to approve it for a variety of reasons. So each one of those titles should go forward to the full board for discussion as part of our process, which we outlined. And again, we've got all those checks and balances in there. And what I can do is get copies of those 3 titles to all of our board members, and we can kind of schedule. They are looking for it for quarter 1, so I would suggest that we take care of it kind of in the June, July range so that they know and can go forward with what it is that they're teaching in that. But those 3, again, because of the process that's pretty well defined, it has to go to the full board. Any questions about that or why we're saying it needs to go forward to the full board? And it's a variety, whether it's the violence or maybe some sexual content, different for each book. We would spell that out so the teachers are kind of going through, much as if you've seen the frame, like with the dystopian, we're going to highlight some of those sections, we're going to give you some of those exact things, but we're also going to make sure that you as board members have those books so that you can read them as well before that discussion. And then if we give you a little bit of time and forewarning, like I said, maybe that June, July part, that gives everyone the opportunity to go through and be ready for discussion. Great.
And then just to finish up this section, English 9, 10, and 11, as well as Honors English 3, do not utilize book clubs as a strategy during quarter 1. And our final class that does is the English elective Modern Literature, and they are not proposing any changes to their list from last year to this year.
All right, sounds good. No questions, I'm assuming? Okay. Then we will move on to our next item, which is the curriculum review process. And it looks like that one will be presented by Kelly Downs and Aaron Faust.
So we have been in the process of just refining this cycle so that we have a very clear, established process that we will be using no matter what subject matter comes across for their curriculum review process. So it is consistent of 4 different pieces, as you'll see within that cycle. There's the evaluate, develop, and design, which has 2 different optional phases, which we'll talk about in a second. Actual implementation and assessing and refining. So as you take a look at the evaluate, that's essentially the time that we're going to be taking a look at our current work, like our current state, and identifying any update to standards, those types of things. Once we've done that, we will determine the pathway. So from our analysis during evaluate, we will determine if we need to go to a resource review where we need completely new resources, or if we can just update within what we currently have. So those are the 2 options of the pathway. The team that we form, just like we did with the math team where we had a representative sample, they would be the ones who would be involved in this evaluation and making these recommendations, obviously with a consistent feedback to the rest of their department teams. Once they've done that, we would implement, whether it's that updated curriculum or it's choosing that new curriculum. As you saw with the math, that's what we're in right now, is planning that implementation possibly for that recommendation. And finally, that implementation has 3 years to it. Notice the years at the top. We've had 1 year for each, but for that implementation, we have allowed 3 years because that first year the teachers are just getting their heads around what has to be done. Second year, we're kind of getting a little deeper. Third year, they're more into that, and then we'll move into the assess and refine. In that assess and refine, we're taking a look at, okay, what do we need to do to make this even stronger as we're using it? And we're also preparing for that evaluate stage, which would come back up and around. So we wanted to make you aware that this is the process that we're putting forth. And on our next agenda item, it'll talk to you about how the different content areas will move through this process. And Aaron will pick that up for us.
So I'm going to ask if Ashley would switch to the next document. Before we move to the next document, though, do you have questions that we can answer about this curriculum cycle that we've outlined? Okay.
All right, so then we'll move to the next item, which is, let's see, where are we now? The curriculum review cycle.
Yes. So this whole process, as Kelly touched on, is really looking across a 7-year cycle. And that is the recommendation for any real curriculum review. We try to stick very tightly to that, but in our upcoming reconfiguration, we are going to have a few places where that might be a little bit quicker and it might be a little bit longer, just so that we can be mindful of current state, but also future forward, so that we are cognizant of the workload on teachers, and they're not learning a new math curriculum one year and then a new ELA curriculum the next year, followed by science. So this is what you're going to see right now is the next several years as we work through the reconfiguration. So you should be able.
For our public, the reconfiguration that we're foreshadowing is based on that referendum when we move 5th grade back to elementary, 6-8 becomes a true middle school. That's the reconfiguration we're speaking to. So as we look at different courses, it accelerates or shifts where they were in that review process.
Thank you. So if you start in the very first box, you can see that our phases from the curriculum cycle work their way across the top. And then as you work down, the different school years will be listed consecutively. So next school year, we are looking at beginning the phase 1, which is evaluate, with several curricular areas, namely social studies, music, world language, art, various CTE classes, particularly at the middle school level, health, K-12, and then human growth and development, public. Notice the asterisk after human growth and development. Anytime you see an asterisk, that is one that is going to continue to be an off-cycle review, regardless of which of these pictures or maps that we're going to look at, because of either DPI requirements or other recommendations on how quickly those cycles should be reviewed. CTE will fall in that same bucket because, as you know, we are very much subject to our partners sometimes and what their review cycles are. So then if we look across for next year, we have those several classes that are going to be in year 1. Moving over, you can see that we have in the orange year 2 classes that are going to be in that phase 2, which is design and develop. The majority of these classes are going to be going through either a resource review or they're going to be going through that design and develop where they are revising what they already have that exists. The ultimate goal by the end of the year in phase 2 is to have a redesigned and redeveloped curriculum that is ready to go for implementation that following year in phase 3. So then if you keep moving over, you will see the work that has been done this year that has been brought to the committee is moving to year 3, which would be the implementation phase. So our English language arts K-5, that's where CKLA will be implemented. The math 612 work that has been done, they're in their implementation year next year. We just brought forth AP government. And then you'll see intervention for ELA that has that asterisk, so it's going to be in an off-cycle year for intervention. And then if you continue down in that phase 1, you can see all of the different course areas will be going through each of these phases in the next several years. So I'll give you a minute to just look at the picture process and then ask questions before we move on.
I think one of the biggest things when you look at so many of our staff, especially in an elementary or even somewhat in the intermediate, they teach multiple subjects. So this was sent out to our leaders. It was also sent out to all staff to check for. We certainly were looking out for making sure that they weren't taking on change every single year, that they had time to absorb change. They're navigating probably one of the largest shifts with Act 20 and literacy that they've seen, maybe for many of them in their career. So we're balancing that workload associated with change as well. So this is something that went out to all staff for feedback prior to bringing it here.
And just to add, the colors really do hopefully help visually. You can track across the years where each of those buckets of work are moving through. All right, and then I'm going to have Ashley move to the next image.
So while she's doing that, this sets up, a continuous improvement cycle where you're always kind of looking at and examining your curriculum, its resources, student outcomes, and it puts you on that path. However, at any time, something can disrupt that, whether it's our partnership with Moraine Park and we need to do a course, it's an Act 20, it's a law, it's something, we've seen something that we need to accelerate. There's a newer resource for AP, we're going to accelerate the conversation. That can certainly change. We're setting up this cycle so that you can review this as a committee annually and as a board, so we know this is the work we're holding ourselves accountable each year. So anticipate this coming back every year, and we would highlight if there's been any changes, recommended changes, why they're there. But that way it's kind of, this is the work then that this committee would take on over the course of the year. This is what you're checking in on. So when you see that kind of big spring, what did we bring to completion in spring? What are we seeing? So it really is an overall guidance document for your work.
And to that point, this is that guidance moving forward. Once we have completed the reconfiguration and our schools are settled into their new structural formats, in 2031, 2032 is really when we will begin the continuing 7-year cycle. So that is where you can start to see where we've been very cognizant of that workload for teachers, of language arts is 1 year, then it's if I add a second year, math is a different year, so that we can really make sure that our teachers have time to learn, process, implement, and be solid in their pedagogy before we add something new to their plate all the time.
I appreciate it. I'm sure there's a lot of thought involved in all of that, trying to line that all up and not give anybody too heavy of a workload.
I know June has a question. Go ahead.
I just have one clarification. There are a couple areas where, for example, 2028-29, where there's a math intervention in year 2 and a math intervention in year 3, and again, an intervention for ELA in 2030-31 in years 2 and 3. So can you explain why they might show up in 2 different years?
On the colorful one, for lack of better clarification, the one that is the right now, they may be going through multiple phases at one time in order to ensure that we can implement and that we have proper resources in place. So that's where some of that might be expedited a little bit, so it shows up in 2 different years, but we're really trying to get the work done so that we have proper resources in teachers' hands.
All right. Okay, it looks like there are not any further questions, so we will move to our next item, which is professional development plan for 2025-2026. And that will be presented by Kelly Downs and Aaron Faust. Are you both on that one?
Yeah.
Sorry.
So from that cycle that you just saw, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And obviously, we want to have our teachers as involved as possible. So we're utilizing our PD plan to be able to support this work. So for your purposes tonight, we've basically just shown you what we have drafted so far, and this is a draft. It has gone out to teachers to get their feedback, and that's kind of where we're at this moment. So we just wanted to make you aware of it so you could have a preview.
And ultimately, you should be able to see as well the goal and the deliverable, so that, as Jen said, you have those checks and balances of here's what we're working on, And then we should be bringing those things forward to the committee to have our continued conversations about. One of the things that didn't go on the PDF is which phase, the little indicator of which phase everything is in, but that is indicated on the maps that you have.
All right. Does anybody have any questions or take a minute to look at it?
No questions. I just want to commend the team on how awesome this looks. Like, from a very outside view, it's understandable, it makes sense, it's laid out awesome, and everyone should know exactly where they're going to be all of these days working on what, and it makes my organized heart so happy because I love it. And like the planning, it looks so great job to everyone who worked on this.
And it really, at each part of this, sending it back out to staff, because our intention is to meet their needs. They are content experts. They have needs for resources, for instructional strategies, all of those. It's our job to serve them. And then continuing to send this out, and is this meeting, like, that's where we are right now. Is this then meeting, those pieces of getting you what you need? Is, this working on your time? So we sent out that frame for that feedback for everyone. And it's, I hope that they're excited by that. I think sometimes when you navigate the unknown, that adds a little extra layer of stress that doesn't need to be there. When I can say, and here's the support and the time you'll be given throughout the year to be in attention during your workday. I think sometimes, people just assume, teachers are teaching during the day and they have all this, that, we need work days and professional development days built into our calendars too, to attend to all the work that they do.
All right. Well, if there are no further comments, then we've reached the end of our planned agenda. So I will go ahead and adjourn the meeting at 5:02 p.m.